If you live on the East Coast, this was probably a winter to remember, with the first blizzard in a decade, and some really, really cold days, and then some near summer days in March.
What's out there?
There's lots of snow. And lots of snow on the cars.
It's always around that time that I start obsessively looking at the weather report, wondering, when is spring really going to get here?
I bet I'm gonna eat it.
I'm Meredith Nutting, and welcome to a new season of Gritty and Green, a podcast about truly urban gardening. If you're new here, in each episode we'll speak to someone in the world of green spaces. We'll learn a little bit about the science and a lot about how to grow successful urban gardens. If you haven't heard the episodes in season 1 and 2, I encourage you to go back and have a listen. I got to speak with some amazing people sharing their garden know-how, and this season we're just adding to that bank of knowledge about how to create, thrive, and grow in green spaces. So, let's get growing. If you're obsessed with your garden, you're probably also obsessed with the weather. You need to know nighttime temperatures, when it's going to rain, first and last frost dates, and at the very least, what growing zone you're in. If you've never heard of a growing zone or hardiness zone, here's your primer. In the United States, the USDA has a zone hardiness map based on the average low temperatures. There are 13 zones. Generally, they move from north to south, zone 1 being the coldest. Only parts of Alaska are in zone 1, with the average low temperatures ranging between negative 60 and negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The hottest is zone 13, and that ranges between 60 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit as the low temperature. Only parts of Puerto Rico are in zone 13. If you plant something that's hardiness rating is for zone 13, it likely will not survive temperatures that dip below the 60s and certainly not freezing if it's left outside. Alternatively, if you plant something that's hardiness rating is for zone 2 or 3, it's probably not going to survive our really hot summers. So when you choose your plants, especially perennials that you're hoping to plant outside, it's really important that you look at their hardiness, and that information is often on the little ID tag that comes with the plant. In Philadelphia, we are in zone 7, specifically zone 7B. If you go out to Bucks County or Montgomery or Chester, you're in zone 7A because it averages a bit colder out there. We have a lot of cement and asphalt and fewer trees, and that makes our city a little warmer. We actually just graduated, if you want to call it that, from zone 7A in the latest update in 2024 because, as we are all aware, climate change is making our planet hotter in general, so all the zones got to shift, mainly towards the next hottest. The other major weather trend that gardeners watch is the first and last frost dates. Frost does not mean that the temperatures are freezing. They're not necessarily below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. It can happen above freezing temperatures, even as high as 42 degrees. If there are clear skies and no wind with cool temperatures, you're likely to get frost even if the thermometer doesn't say 32 degrees, which is the freezing point of water. So if you're not paying attention to the frost warnings and just the temperatures, you may be one sad gardener. Knowing when the last frost date occurs is really important in starting your garden. You certainly don't want to put most plants out until after that last frost, but you also want to start seeds inside based on that date. A lot of seed packets will include instructions about starting seeds indoors 2 weeks, 4 weeks, even 6 weeks before the last frost. If you start them too early, the risk that the seedlings can develop issues is greater. If you start them too late, well, you're just wasting some of the growing season. I have always used the frost date calculator from the Old Farmer's Almanac to determine when it is safe to plant in Philadelphia. And so I was super excited to speak with its editor-in-chief to learn about their history and tradition in reporting the weather.
My name is Carol Kinnair, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Almanac, the Old Farmer's Almanac. I just started here, back here actually 2.5 years ago. I worked for Yankee Publishing, which is our parent company, 25 years ago. And I always loved the Almanac. Always used the Almanac. I'm a big gardener myself. And I had spent 20 years at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. And which turns out was a really good, I taught writing, I did publications, but also worked at the research library, which is a good background for the Almanac since we're very much a reference company in some ways. And so I'm a boomerang. I came back to where I started my career, really, and for this publication that I love. Like, it's a dream job because I love all these things. I love astrology. I like astronomy. I like gardening and history and all the things that we do. And of course, the idea of farmers and the food that is grown for us, is such an important ecosystem too. So all of those things, that's how I made my way back. An almanac, the actual word almanac, is actually calendar. It really dates back to the idea of a calendar. And that's true for us. There's something for every day of the year in the almanac. And of course, then we're always thinking about seasons throughout a year. It's about celestial movement. It's about the night sky, because that's how we're telling calendars and seasons, but also about growing, because of course, when we started in 1792, 90% of people working in US were involved in agriculture. Now that's like 1.6% or something like that. And so these things were really important. Keeping track, what to do with the seasons, how to make things grow. We're feeding our families. And so it's all of those things, but it is at its essence a calendar.
The Old Farmer's Almanac is the last of its kind, but it wasn't the first. In the U.S., almanacs started in the 1600s, and perhaps the most famous one, in this city at least, is Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac, which started in 1732.
Our founder, Robert B. Thomas, was just 26 when he came out with his first edition in 1792, and really he was modeling his after Poor Richard's Almanac. He always held that as the standard, and again, this idea that almost everybody was growing, their own crops for their families, or were doing that as a job. And so it's really important. So what does the almanac give you? It gave you the latest in technology, really, for farming. New ideas, new ways of rotating crops, or, planting hay in this certain way, or ways that we do things. And those were generated out of the universities, the early universities, in New England at that time. And so always relying on science. So he starts his almanac, and by 1815, there are 500 almanacs in America. So regionality is a big thing. Then it's 17 years later, he's like the last one. So it was like this real big flush, but then newspapers really start. And so it's like they're taking the place. But his almanac stood the test of time. And everyone asks why. And we believe that's because his ingredients it needs to be useful with a pleasant degree of humor. Not only that, but as right as possible. It's 1839, and he decides to put old in the title because we were the Farmer's Almanac. So he puts it in parentheses because he's not sure, really, if he wants to be old, like many of us. And then he takes it out a few years later. He dies editing the 1846 edition. He's 80 years old. And then 2 years later, we put old in the title. And that was at we would call that age 55, which, since I wouldn't consider that old. But, it qualifies. So we've been Old Farmer's Almanac ever since then. And we've changed with the times. I think people love the tradition of us, but of course, we're always looking for the newfangled as well as the old-fashioned. But I think it's that idea of tradition. I think people are understanding that our understanding of the earth and of Mother Nature, there's more to understand than we know. And people are kind of getting back to that idea and noticing things in nature. Just the idea of phenology, I think, is really special. Like, when the lilacs bloom, it's time to plant your peas or your potatoes. This idea of we can observe one thing and know another. So I think that we're seeing a lot of that. And even the younger generation, we've always done like folklore and, like I said, astrology. And there's just a lot of contemporary interest in that. So that's a lot of fun to see people, younger folks, coming to us for that. And of course, growing. So we come out with the almanac every September 1, and then Garden Guide comes out 1st of February or right around there. So this is less of a print run. It's probably 300,000, but they're, again, like in garden stores, and you can get them online. And this is just an annual, like, it's garden porn. Like, it is so good. It is just like so much color and all the trends. So like we do trends in the Old Farmer's Almanac, but we do just garden trends. And it's like, ooh, like, miniature things or AI or whatever, it's like in the middle of winter when you need it, but gives you ideas for the gardening ahead. And we cover everything from, edible gardening to flowers to landscaping to indoor gardening, lots of indoor gardening, small space gardening. So yeah, it's just a total, every year is new stuff. So that's a big one that we do. We're working on that all the time as well. And then our calendars, like I said, and then the guidebooks. We started a new series, so our guidebooks are a bit bigger. It's flowers, vegetables, containers, and then houseplants will come out next fall. But we're starting some smaller guides that start in the year, and they're focused on just little smaller subjects like herbs, guide to growing herbs and sort of the history of herbs. So maybe 25, 30 herb profiles, how to grow them, how to use them. So those things are things we're doing, spinning from things we already have, but repackaging them because we can see, we have so many people come to almanac.com. We have so many people ask questions online. It's this gift because we can see this is what people want to know. This is what they're asking. We answer them all. We don't do AI for that, for really anything. And so that's an important way for us to understand, like, this is what people want to be doing.
The Almanac's website has so much great information about gardening and canning, even astronomy. But by far the thing I use it for the most, and this is probably true for a lot of people through history, the weather.
Weather is what ties us together, and it still does. We're in the crazy business of long-range weather forecasting. I should have mentioned that more in the origin story because, that's what makes us so popular, is that if you're in the 1800s even, having a leg up, understanding maybe this is a drought year or what are we in for, or even just the idea of trying to plan or prepare for what might come weather-wise. I think that's the thing. Our long-range forecasts are based on sunspot activity. That is the essence of our long-range forecasting. It's all about data and science. Robert B. Thomas, our founder, was an astronomer. And so by that point, of course, Galileo was watching sunspots in 1609, with his telescope. And the Chinese, I think, were really looking at them for about 1,000 years. So we have a lot of data. We had a lot of data about sunspot activity. We knew there's this 11 to 13 year storm cycle on the sun. And of course, for us, we're saying that extra solar radiation, coming toward Earth has an impact on our weather. And what does that mean? Well, that means we're crunching data. It's like, what are those, if we're in year 7 of a sunspot cycle and we know this about the temperatures of the ocean and the jet stream is slower, what have you, we can make predictions based on that. And, of course, bringing climatology into it because, that's what all growers are looking at. Like, things have drastically changed. The hardiness zone map of the U.S. changed 2 years ago, and many places ticked up a zone or half a zone. And so people are seeing that on the ground. So we obviously are taking into consideration those things as well. But yeah, and we do them way in advance. And AccuWeather works our formula for those forecasts with us.
The Old Farmer's Almanac has been predicting the weather for over 230 years, and they claim to be 80% accurate.
And, what does that mean? So every year we publish a page that says for these representative cities in each region, same for our Canadian edition, how do we do? So it's city dependent. We can't say for everywhere, but we are pretty close. And especially with precipitation, we're getting better. I think a lot of people have experienced, this idea that we're getting shorter storms that are more intense. And that has a lot of implication for gardeners, whether you're container gardening or backyard gardening. Is my soil resilient enough to take that? But that idea of more water and in shorter times is something that we're getting better because that's a trend that has been really progressing over the last few years, I'd say. So we're getting better at predicting that, but that's still a wild card, in a lot of ways. And yeah, so it's this idea, like anything ties us together. I think of it as people who just love the natural world, whether it's they're outside for their job or they love to garden or they're, a night sky watcher. We depend on, am I going to need to water? Can I get outside tonight? Like just those kind of basic things that affect people from all walks of life. But I would say weather's the one that ties us in,
Of course, if you had been paying attention to the news last summer, you might remember that the government made huge cuts to both the National Weather Service and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. These cuts have the potential to cause huge issues in collecting data and maintaining data sets as well as forecasting.
Our dander was up when that's happened. And of course, a lot of the data has been removed. However, we work with very large data sets that AccuWeather with us, that are still available and that we have. So I don't foresee a problem with that. I think that probably people are going to clamor enough to get these weather indications back up. I mean, the farmers have been hurting in a lot of ways, and they're really the loudest on this issue because, they're investing the most money and their work is weather dependent. And so, yeah, I think that I'm hoping it's a short-term situation, but we're all good because, we are really looking at historical trends over time and that data is secure. And especially this idea that lots of it comes from EDUs or other, like when we're talking about weather station sites, and those, of course, keep doing. So will there be need for another kind of aggregator if the government's not going to do it? That will happen. I think, we're pretty savvy with data now, but sure. I mean, it's especially the way it's affecting farmers.
Here's hoping that the farmers get the scientific resources that they desperately need. Another bit of the Farmer's Almanac that I've really been interested in is lunar planting, or gardening by the moon. I've even been creating an entire gardening journal around the idea. Though there are a lot of resources, the Almanac's growing charts are really clear and easy to use. So of course, I had to ask Carol more.
It's really been at the heart of the Almanac since the beginning. Most people that I know that are longtime users of the Almanac are moon gardeners. And so what does that mean, right? So I don't want to be repetitive if you already did the subject, but it's talking about what phases of the moon are more beneficial than others for certain types of plants and planting in general. So yes, we have a whole chart about planting by the moon, gardening by the moon. And, the simple idea, and you may have covered this, is it's water, right? So if we know the moons affect the tides, so we can see that one, if you're near the ocean, in a full moon, tides rise. And so this idea of it's also affecting water we can't see, and the ground is how much, 60% water. I don't know where, humans are like 80%, plants are 90%. So it stands to reason that the moon is also affecting that water. And this idea of, okay, so when the moon is waxing and the light is growing, we're talking about that's a good time to plant above ground crops if, the frost date is right, because this idea of the energy of the water kind of, putting things upward. And then, root crops, we always say. So this is the most basic example. We want to do that in the waning moon because we're looking for that really heavy-duty root growth so that the water is really retracting or coming back toward the ground. And so it's just helpful. So the energy, of the moon's effect on water is at the essence. I mean, there's also people who layer on, what the constellations are doing, like what, and so is that favorable or not favorable? So that's the essence of it. It's also kind of like you said about what am I seeing there? Okay, that's a reminder. Like I need to get to that this week. It's this idea, and then I have a wonderful herb gardener, Four Seasons Herb. She's in Wisconsin, has written about moon gardening for us, Jane Hawley, and she said for her, it's also like at the new moon time and the very end of the waning, it's just this wonderful time to reset and, be inward. So whether that means it's about gardening or not, it's kind of like getting all your ducks in a row for the next upward tick, So it's also just sort of a social or cultural indicator of taking time. There's this wonderful book, and it's called Our Moon. It came out last year, and it's such a cool book. She talks about basically the beginning of timekeeping. Okay, so that's the moon. This is the thing that any indigenous culture would start to think about and see, Stonehenge, like all of these things, this idea of light. And some of the earliest timekeeping and calendars were really these basic, like 13 pits, like somewhere in Europe. And then there's this bronze etched, it's like a clock, but it's really about the moon phases. So I think that the idea of it was always there for when agricultural cultures started to grow, instead of be nomadic, and that's the idea. So it was really a timekeeping thing, but of course timekeeping is almost more important than the weather when you're trying to grow stuff. So I think it really dates back before any kind of an almanac or anything. It's just really how first peoples who did tend, livestock and crops, that's how they did it.
You guys are very science-based as far as like the weather and stuff, but as far as I could tell, there was no scientific proof about the moon gardening. And I have myself been attributing that as like, it's just really hard to study that kind of stuff. But do you have anything to say, like, where does that information come from? Is there any science behind it? Is it just historic lore that we've, you know, kind of witnessed, or just kind of a fun practice?
I think it's practitioner based. I think you're right. It's something like when you were saying that, it made me think about, we were just starting to do it. We've always had companion plants. Okay, parsley likes to be near, peppers or whatever it is, like we know trap crops and, marigolds are great for everything in the garden and all those things. Grow your basil and tomato together. But why? So to your question, I'm not sure, we won't see some studies that come out about this because I think there's been a renewed interest. But for companion planting, there have been. In fact, we've been updating everything on our publications and our website based on what is really relatively more recent research, because again, it was folklore, but of course probably based on observation, on practice, on experience. But now we're getting scientific evidence. And so it's fantastic to bring that in and confirm or deny, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do get some more interest in this idea of gardening by the moon. And of course, astrology is a funny one. And we do get complaints now and then, because I think people are, some people don't like that. And, we just say it's been with us since the beginning. And I think if you look at it, many people who live rurally still have a bit of superstition. And maybe it's based on, again, family lore, which is actual experience about the position of the planets and certain things having to do with the body. So we always have the man of the signs in there. And, so some people get their niggers in a twist about it. But the idea is that if you think about it, modern medicine actually wasn't very good in the 1700s. And people were looking for natural medicine. They were looking for anything, of course, that would be maybe better than leeches, or whatever they had at their disposal. So I think it really isn't as old as we think, and that families hold on to those ideas. And again, who's to say, I don't know if we're going to prove or disprove those, but I think people say, hey, if I can, like I could hedge my bets, right? But I do think, like with companion planting and even moon phase planting, that science will bear it out.
And if the science does come through, I'm sure we'll be reading about it in the Old Farmer's Almanac. So where do you even find the almanac in this digital, increasingly AI world?
How do you get it into people's hands? And postage is going up and paper is going up. Most consumers get it. Like you walk into even your CVS, say, or your drugstore, and it's like the newsstand has shrunk. Sometimes they don't even exist in grocery stores anymore, where many of us got magazines and things. And so our publisher is really gifted, and Shireen Pierce. And so she has for years been moving us to bookstore channels. So we're on Amazon. Also this is a great way to get a lot of our products into Canada. We're on Amazon in Canada. And then also we do direct sales to so many mom and pop hardware stores, or really anybody who wants to carry us, as well as big ones like, Lowe's or any place you want to get garden stuff, Walmart. So we're really kind of covering a lot of bases instead of depending on the newsstand. We have our own stands that go out in the fall. We sell 350,000 just of our gardening calendar that's going to turn 50 in a couple of years. That's unheard of. It's an illustrated calendar. We do a moon calendar. We do a country calendar. We do a weather calendar, of course, and then you'll see behind me like books and journals. We do a whole gardening handbook series. Our latest was the container gardening handbook. Great for urban gardeners because we saw this as a trend. The next one is houseplants, including, how to do a little food inside, because people like to do that. So we're really in the growing space in a lot of different ways. Almanac.com is free. One thing when I was thinking about this talk, we've been really putting up new tools. Again, another way we've diversified, I think, different than the Farmer's Almanac. So AI has been hitting everybody. your eyeballs go down because they're just synopsizing things, if that's even a word. But now it's like, so what do we do about that? But we were already developing tools. So one is really cool. So it's like, I want to grow tomatoes in containers. What size container do I need? So we have a little tool that says, like, here's what it is. Like, you want to grow this plant or cucumbers or whatever it is, or, also other flowers and things. But the idea of veggies, and just right there, you can just go boop and like find, okay, I need this kind of container. Some vegetables have long tap roots. You need a tall one. That's going to come up in it. So I think that's a fun tool. We've been anything by planting by zones, you can find by zip code for us. If you have a bigger backyard, mulch calculators, and on and on. So this idea of useful, that extends through all of our products. And these tools have been an exciting new thing that we've brought to almanac.com.
And the resources on the website are free and super easy to use. So that was Carol Conner, the editor-in-chief of the Old Farmer's Almanac. You can find it in many of your garden supply stores and, of course, on their website. This year, I used their frost calculator to find out that our last predicted frost date in Philadelphia is April 4th. That means if you're starting cold-loving vegetables from seed, you can start them indoors in February, and the same thing if you're starting seeds indoors for things like peppers and tomatoes. I say this because this time of year, a lot of folks are crowdsourcing information about when to plant in their garden, and inevitably folks in different forums will give Grandma's famous, wait until after Mother's Day. This isn't necessarily bad advice if you're just hoping to put out some flowers and don't really care about how much you can grow in one year. But if you really want to have a thriving garden for the full season, mid-May is really late to be starting. You've already missed the window on growing a lot of the cold-loving plants like root vegetables and green veggies like kale and lettuce. It's already going to be too hot for those things to thrive. Of course, if that is your situation right now, don't fret. You still have lots of time to plant all of the wonderful things that love the heat, like tomatoes and peppers and eggplant, zucchini, squash. And you can even get a second crop of those cold vegetables, those radishes and beets, lettuce and kale, when the temperatures start to get cooler in the autumn. I will say, though, I do wait to put out nice flowers out front in my sidewalk garden until after Mother's Day. Not because of the weather, but because that's the only time when my plants get stolen, typically from well-meaning but bad-acting kids looking for a free gift for their mamas. All that being said, if you're listening to this now, it is time to get your hands dirty. Thank you for joining me to learn about our history with almanacs and forecasting the weather. And a very big thank you to Carol Conner at the Old Farmer's Almanac. I have links to the online almanac and resources I love to use in the show notes. If you've been liking this podcast, please like, review, and share it. And also follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky at Gritty and Green for gardening tips, tricks, and an ongoing guide to gardening by the moon. You can sign up for my newsletter and get your own free copy of the work in progress that is the Garden by the Moon Journal at my website. Links for both of those are in the show notes. And if you have any gardening questions you would like answered, email them to grittyandgreen@coolgoonproductions.com. Gritty and Green is presented by Green Philly in collaboration with Cool Goon Productions. It was written, directed, and edited by me, Meredith Nutting. Theme music by Kazuya. If you want more information about local sustainability, go to greenphl.com.